During the late 1990s, America's booming economy sent more carbon into the atmosphere than ever before.
So by the time Bill Clinton's administration was finished, we saw greenhouse gases so much higher than they were at the beginning of the decade that any president, not just George W. Bush, but any president, even an Al Gore presidency, would have found it very, very difficult to meet the Kyoto targets. That's the dirty little secret.
In the 2000 campaign, Al Gore had the reputation as the strongest environmentalist ever to run for president.
Now, I want to talk about the environment here today because we have a situation where the big polluters are supporting Governor Bush and they are wanting to be in control of the environmental policies.
But candidate Gore rarely mentioned global warming or talked about mandatory carbon caps.
The politics was so divisive. They wrapped all of any problems with Kyoto around Gore's neck.
Ranked #1 is the smoggiest state.
The Republicans were going to try to beat him up on this really as aggressively as they possibly could. What they call Ozone Al or whatever it was called.
In Texas, we passed one of the toughest.
Then, Texas Governor George W. Bush outflanked Gore on Gore's own turf.
My opponent calls for voluntary reductions in such emissions. In Texas, I think we've done it better with mandatory reductions, and I believe the nation can do better as well.
Bush surprised many by backing mandatory cuts in greenhouse gas emissions.
With the help of Congress, environmental groups, and industry, we will require all power plants to meet clean air standards in order to reduce emissions of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, mercury, and carbon dioxide within a reasonable period of time.
And that was kind of a big deal coming from him, and I think it was seen as a way to sort of out-green Gore, which probably worked.
In the first few weeks of his administration, President Bush sent another signal. He appointed a governor with a strong environmental record to head the EPA. Christine Todd Whitman also backed mandatory CO2 reductions.
I felt that it would be important for our country, as a leader, as the #1 producer of greenhouse gases, to be seen as being engaged in this issue, be a world leader here.
One of Whitman's first duties was to attend ongoing climate treaty talks in Trieste, Italy. Before leaving, she says she coordinated her talking points with the White House.
I went through the White House and went to all of them and said, look, I am going to say the president's called for a cap on carbon. Is that okay?
And in that White House, who said you can go to Trieste and you can say those things?
Well, I ran it through the National Security Council. I ran it through the Chief of Staff. I ran it through everybody that I could think of.
So that was Andy Card and Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah.
In the crossfire, Environmental Protection Agency.
Just before her trip, the former New Jersey governor was a guest on CNN.
Governor, tonight, as we sit here, the environmental conservatives are up in arms.
Robert Novak charged Whitman with misrepresenting administration policy.
The only theory under which carbon dioxide is allegedly harmful is a catastrophic global warming theory, which was as I remember, it was Al Gore's, not George Bush.
Whitman reminded Novak of the president's campaign pledge.
He has also been very clear that the science is good on global warming. It does exist. There is a real problem that we as a world face from global warming, and to the extent that introducing CO2 to the discussion is going to have an impact on global warming, that's an important step to take.
So without having a serious discussion with Bush, because Whitman had not had a detailed discussion on global warming with Bush at the point at which she's on CNN, and so she thought she was on safe ground. And of course she finds out quickly that she was not.
See you after.
While Whitman was in Italy, a policy review was already underway in Washington. Energy had moved to the top of the White House agenda. Vice President Dick Cheney had assembled an energy task force, meeting in secret with the oil, gas, and coal industries. Up for discussion was the president committed to mandatory carbon caps.
We were hearing things out of Vice President Cheney's office, who certainly made it very clear they didn't think that was the case. Then we were hearing things from the EPA administrator. We weren't sure where the president was, so the only way to deal with it is write a letter and get it on the record. What is your position? And that's what we did.
The letter from Hagel and 3 other Republican senators intensified the debate at the White House. The vice president asked the Energy Department to assess the costs of capping carbon.
The Energy Department said cutting these emissions will be costly in a certain way. And the Environmental Protection Agency weighed in, saying, no, that report isn't applicable, this is why, and there really is growing evidence that the world is warming because of these emissions, and it's worth sticking with what you did. And the team at the White House that was assessing all this was made of political operatives. There was not a scientist in the room. And they obviously took the information that was convenient and disregarded the information that was inconvenient.
Within a week of receiving the letter from the Republican senators, President Bush signed off on a reply. He would reverse his campaign pledge on carbon emissions. When Whitman returned from Europe, she requested a meeting with the president. She says she had no idea the carbon policy had been reversed without her input.
I thought I had a chance. It was just the president, Andy Card, and I, and it was kind of to go through the reasons why we were going to go away from the cap on carbon and back away from it.
The president told her the decision had already been made.
There really wasn't much discussion about climate change or how we could live up to the campaign promise or anything like that. And then when I left, as I came out of the Oval Office, the vice president was coming down the hall putting on his coat and said, well, is the letter ready? And took a letter. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it turned out it was the letter to Hagel.
How much do you think that the vice president had to do with that decision?
I think he probably had a great deal to do with it. He is certainly the one who had the lead on the energy issues. I had long conversations back and forth with him. Well, no, I had long conversations with him. There wasn't a lot of back and forth with him. He sort of smiles and nods, and you don't really know where he is on a lot of things.
But there would be even bigger news. The Bush administration had decided to withdraw from the Kyoto Climate Treaty process altogether.
Climate change, with its potential to impact every corner of the world, is an issue that must be addressed by the world. The Kyoto Protocol was fatally flawed in fundamental ways.
America's closest allies were stunned. Protests were immediate and worldwide.
Do you think that the president understood that there was going to be a huge, huge reaction in the rest of the world?
I'm not sure they understood how big a reaction was going to be, and I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference even if they had. Because what was happening here was more important.
And it was a big reaction.
It was a big reaction. It was a very big reaction. It was a British paper, I think, that said with one stroke of the pen, the president has determined that there are more important things in the world than the rest of the world, basically, that the United States is more important, and there's other issues, that this is a minor thing. It was the way it happened was the equivalent to flipping the bird, frankly, to the rest of the world on an issue about which they felt so deeply.
The key message from this White House is that we will do what we decide to do, and you can sit and listen, you can throw up your hands and run in circles. Well, that's your choice. The United States will now do what it does for whatever reason it decides. And your job, as the rest of the world, is to deal with it.